What if I told you that the Bible we all know might be missing some crucial details about the creation, the lives of the patriarchs, and even the laws of God himself? The Book of Jubilees, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, claims to fill in the gaps, revealing hidden stories and offering deeper insight into God's divine plan. But here's the catch: this book was banned from most of the Christian world. Why? In today's video, we'll uncover the mysterious Book of Jubilees, also known as Little Genesis, and explore why its 50 chapters were excluded from the mainstream Christian Bible. This ancient text holds lost details about the Genesis narrative, offering a cosmic perspective on how angels, heavenly time, and hidden commandments were passed down to humanity. But the book doesn't stop there. It even insists that the calendar most of the world follows is wrong and that time itself was given a sacred structure by God, a structure that few still follow today. So why was this ancient text rejected by the early church? What secrets does it contain that were deemed too controversial for mainstream Christianity? The Book of Jubilees begins by retelling the creation story we know from Genesis, but it goes far beyond what most Bibles include. According to Jubilees, when God created the world, he didn't just bring life into being. He also set up the very structure of time itself, aligning it with his divine order. This is where the concept of sacred time comes in. Unlike the traditional calendar most of us follow, the Book of Jubilees introduces a precise solar calendar, overseen by heavenly angels, that governs the cosmic cycles of the universe. This isn't just about counting days. It's about living in perfect alignment with God's will. Jubilees claims that humanity was meant to follow this divine calendar, which consists of 364 days, divided into 4 seasons of exactly 91 days each. This structure ensures that sacred days, like the Sabbath and festivals, always fall on the correct date. It's a perfect system, but it's one that the rest of the world has forgotten. In the Book of Genesis, the story begins with the creation of the earth, but Jubilees gives us an even bigger picture. Before the world was even formed, angels were created on the first day. These angels play a crucial role in the governance of the universe, including the regulation of time and seasons. The Book of Jubilees reveals that these angels were assigned specific duties by God, some overseeing natural phenomena like the movements of the heavens, and others serving as messengers and guardians of God's laws. This idea of angels controlling the heavens is something we also see in other ancient texts, but the Book of Jubilees emphasizes how these angelic beings help maintain order in the universe, ensuring that the sun, moon, and stars follow their divine paths. For God had ordained that the sun should keep its course according to the divisions of the seasons. These angels don't just watch over humanity, they control the very fabric of time. When humans fall out of alignment with God's time, it leads to chaos, a theme that plays a central role throughout the Book of Jubilees. One of the most controversial elements of the Book of Jubilees is its insistence that the world should follow a solar calendar, not the lunar calendar that many ancient cultures, including the Israelites, eventually adopted. According to Jubilees, the solar calendar is the only correct way to measure time because it aligns perfectly with God's divine order. The book explains that the solar year consists of 364 days, divided into 52 perfect weeks. Each season, spring, summer, fall, and winter, contains exactly 13 weeks or 91 days. This system ensures that the Sabbath and other sacred festivals are always observed on the correct days each year. This solar calendar is strikingly similar to the Ethiopian calendar, which is still used today by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Ethiopian year is divided into 13 months, 12 months of 30 days each, with an additional month called Pagam consisting of 5 or 6 days to make up the difference. Could it be that the Ethiopian calendar is one of the few modern systems that still reflects the sacred time described in Jubilees? In contrast, the lunar calendar, which was adopted by many cultures, including the Israelites, is seen as a corruption of this divine order. The lunar calendar is irregular, causing the months and festivals to shift over time. Jubilees warns that this deviation from the solar calendar leads to spiritual disorder. There will be those who will surely make observations of the moon, but they will disturb the seasons and make an abominable day, the Day of Testimony. For Jubilees, following the lunar calendar is not just a mistake, it's a form of disobedience to God's will. The book suggests that by returning to the solar calendar, humanity can realign itself with the divine rhythms set in motion at the creation of the world. The Book of Jubilees reaffirms the traditional six-day creation narrative found in Genesis, but it goes into more detail about the first Sabbath. According to Jubilees, God didn't just rest on the seventh day. He sanctified it as a divine institution, an eternal law given to both humans and angels. The Sabbath is seen as the foundation of time, a day set apart at the beginning of creation and meant to be observed forever. This idea of the Sabbath as a cosmic principle is critical in Jubilees. Not only does it govern the weekly cycle, but it also ties into the larger structure of time, including the Jubilee cycles of 49 years. These cycles are meant to bring the world back into harmony with God's order, offering a period of rest, release, and renewal for the land, the people, and even the angelic realm. The emphasis on the Sabbath as an eternal law shows how Jubilees is not just retelling the Genesis story. It's revealing the hidden significance behind the cycles of time that govern all of creation. The Book of Jubilees tells us that Adam was created on the sixth day, just as described in Genesis, but it adds a new layer to his story. According to Jubilees, after creating Adam, God gave him specific commandments right from the beginning, laws that included the observance of the Sabbath, purity laws, and the rules concerning marriage and worship. These laws, delivered by angels, were meant to be followed by Adam and his descendants as part of the covenant God made with humanity. While Genesis mentions God's direct interactions with Adam, Jubilees introduces angelic beings as mediators who teach Adam how to follow God's commandments. These angels, particularly those known as the angels of the presence, ensure that Adam and Eve understand the laws of holiness, sacrifice, and moral conduct. This angelic interaction was meant to reinforce the idea that God's law is not just a human invention but part of the heavenly order. The angels taught Adam that he must observe God's laws as an eternal covenant, just as they observe the same laws in the heavenly realm. Could it be that God's laws, passed down through angels, were given to humanity long before Moses received the Ten Commandments? What might we learn from these ancient laws? After the fall of Adam and Eve, Jubilees adds new insight into the story of their children, Cain and Abel. While Genesis tells us that Cain killed Abel, the Book of Jubilees provides additional details about the events that followed. Cain's murder of Abel is seen as the first major breach of God's law, a sin that leads to spiritual consequences for all of humanity. But while Cain is cast out, Jubilees emphasizes that the righteous line of humanity continues through Seth, Adam's third son. In Jubilees, Seth is portrayed as a figure of righteousness who is taught to follow the laws handed down by the angels. This sets the stage for later descendants, including Noah, to continue the covenant with God. The story of Noah and the flood is well known from Genesis, but the Book of Jubilees offers additional revelations about what happened before and after the Great Flood. In Jubilees, the focus is not just on Noah's survival but on the covenant God establishes with him afterward, a covenant that emphasizes the importance of purity, righteousness, and observing God's laws. Before the flood, Jubilees delves deeper into the corruption of the earth, particularly focusing on the Nephilim, the offspring of fallen angels and human women. While Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4 briefly mentions the Nephilim, Jubilees provides more context, showing how these giants contributed to the wickedness that led God to cleanse the earth with the flood. And lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way, like men and cattle and beasts and birds and everything that walks on the earth. All of them corrupted their ways and their orders, and they began to devour each other. This moral decay wasn't just due to human sin but also the influence of fallen angels who introduced forbidden knowledge and corrupted the natural order. God's response was swift. He sent the flood to wipe out this corruption, but he preserved Noah and his family because of their righteousness. After the flood, the Book of Jubilees reveals that God not only promised never to flood the earth again, but he also established a new covenant with Noah, which included specific laws concerning purity and sacrifice. These laws, which were later passed down to the Israelites, were designed to help humanity maintain holiness and avoid the corruption that led to the flood. One key detail in Jubilees is that Noah was instructed to observe the Sabbath and follow the same laws given to Adam regarding sacrifice and purity. This covenant marked a new beginning for humanity, emphasizing the importance of remaining obedient to God's laws to prevent further judgment. The laws of sacrifice, which would later be formalized in the Mosaic Law, were already being observed by Noah as part of this covenant. These laws included instructions on how to offer burnt offerings to God and how to remain pure in both body and spirit. In Genesis 12, we are introduced to Abraham when God calls him to leave his homeland and go to Canaan. However, Jubilees takes us further back into Abraham's youth, adding an entirely new dimension to his story. According to Jubilees, Abraham grew up in a family steeped in idolatry, with his father, Terah, worshipping false gods. This detail is not mentioned in Genesis, but Jubilees paints a vivid picture of a young Abraham who rejects the pagan practices around him and chooses instead to follow the one true God. He said to his father, "Tell me, what is this idol you worship?" When he saw that it was an image of stone, he burned it before the eyes of all and fled into the wilderness. Jubilees 11:16-17. While Genesis focuses on Abraham's obedience to God's call to leave his home, Jubilees portrays Abraham as a revolutionary figure who destroyed the idols in his father's house and made a bold stand against the idolatry of his time. This act of spiritual rebellion sets the stage for Abraham's later role as the father of the chosen people, who would reject pagan practices and follow the laws of God. One of the most striking differences between Genesis and Jubilees is the idea that Abraham followed divine laws long before Moses was ever born. In Genesis, there is no mention of Abraham being given laws, other than the covenant of circumcision in Genesis 17. However, in Jubilees, Abraham is presented as someone who already observed the Sabbath, made sacrifices, and followed other laws typically associated with Moses. According to Jubilees, these laws were not invented during the time of Moses. They were passed down from the angels to the patriarchs, beginning with Adam. Abraham received these commandments from the angels and was expected to follow them as part of his covenant relationship with God. He was taught by the angels about the things written in the tablets of heaven, Jubilees 12:25. Unlike Genesis, where Abraham's actions are seen as part of his personal faith journey, Jubilees presents him as someone who is part of a cosmic plan. He is guided by angels, and the laws he follows are part of a divine order that governs both heaven and earth. These laws include the Sabbath and various purity laws that Moses would later formalize. The covenant of circumcision is one of the most important moments in Abraham's story. In Genesis 17, God tells Abraham to circumcise himself and all the males in his household as a sign of the covenant. However, Jubilees goes even further, revealing that this was not just a symbolic act. It was part of a cosmic law written on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, circumcision wasn't just a sign for Abraham's descendants, but a divine law that had existed since the creation of the world. This covenant was inscribed on the heavenly tablets, which are seen as God's blueprint for creation, containing all the laws that govern both angels and humans. This law is for all the generations forever, and there is no circumcision of the days and no passing over 1 day out of the 8 days, for it is an eternal ordinance, ordained and written on the heavenly tablets, Jubilees 15:25. In Genesis, the focus is on Abraham's obedience to God's command, but Jubilees portrays this act as part of a much larger divine order. Circumcision is not just a physical sign. It's a way of aligning oneself with the cosmic laws that govern the universe. The story of the binding of Isaac, known as the Akedah, is one of the most powerful moments in Genesis 22 verses 1 to 19, where God tests Abraham's faith by asking him to sacrifice his son Isaac. Jubilees retells this story with some added layers. In Jubilees, the test is not just between Abraham and God. It's also part of a larger spiritual warfare. According to Jubilees, the angel Mastema, often associated with Satan, is the one who suggests this test to God, hoping that Abraham will fail. Mastema represents the forces of evil, constantly seeking to undermine the righteous. The Book of Jubilees adds that angels intervened during the binding, and God allowed the test to show that Abraham's faith was greater than the temptations of evil. And I stood before him and before the prince of Mastema, and the Lord said, Command him not to lay his hand on the lad nor to do anything to him, for I have shown that he fears the Lord. Jubilees 18:10. This story in Jubilees introduces a whole new level of spiritual significance. It's not just a test of Abraham's obedience, it's part of the cosmic battle between good and evil. Mastema tries to lead Abraham into failure, but God's intervention shows that faithfulness will always triumph over evil. In Genesis, the story focuses on Abraham's personal test, but in Jubilees, it's part of a larger spiritual narrative that involves angelic forces and the struggle between good and evil. In Genesis 25 verse 23, we are told that before Jacob and Esau were even born, God revealed to their mother Rebekah that the two brothers would become the heads of 2 nations, and that the older Esau would serve the younger Jacob. Jubilees expands on this prophecy, emphasizing that this wasn't just a family feud. It was part of a cosmic design in which Jacob was always meant to inherit the blessing and continue the line of righteousness that started with Abraham. Jubilees adds a layer of predestination, revealing that Jacob was chosen from birth to carry on the covenant, while Esau was destined to stray from God's plan. The book even notes that Isaac and Rebekah were given divine knowledge about Esau's rebellious nature and his future descendants' opposition to Israel. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations shall be divided from your womb, and 1 nation shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Jubilees 19:13. In Genesis, we see this struggle unfold through Jacob's cunning and Esau's impulsiveness, but Jubilees explains that Jacob was always meant to inherit the birthright and that his actions, although deceptive, were part of fulfilling a divine plan. One of the key differences in Jubilees is the portrayal of Esau as more than just a brother who loses his birthright. Jubilees emphasizes that Esau represents a line of rebellion against God's chosen people. His descendants are portrayed as a nation that will rise in opposition to Israel, fulfilling the prophecy that the elder will serve the younger. The book even shows how Esau's descendants, the Edomites, would go on to have numerous conflicts with the Israelites, reflecting the spiritual battle that began with their forefathers. And Esau took his wives and his sons and all that he had, and he went up to the hill country of Seir and lived there. And Esau became a nation, and they oppressed Jacob's descendants, Jubilees 37:1. Jubilees makes it clear that Esau's rebellion was not just personal but national. His descendants would become the Edomites, who would oppose Israel throughout history. This ongoing struggle between Jacob and Esau's descendants represents the larger cosmic conflict between righteousness and rebellion, good and evil. One of the most significant moments in Jacob's life is when he receives the blessing from his father Isaac in Genesis. This blessing ensures that Jacob becomes the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, Genesis 27. But Jubilees goes even further, emphasizing that Jacob was given not just a blessing but also the continuation of the divine laws passed down from Abraham. According to Jubilees, after Jacob receives the blessing, God and the angels reveal to him the laws that he and his descendants must follow. These include the observance of the Sabbath, purity laws, and the sacred calendar laws that would later become formalized in the Mosaic Law. Jacob is portrayed as the keeper of these laws, tasked with ensuring that his descendants, the future Israelites, follow them as part of their covenant relationship with God. And the Lord appeared to him by night and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land whereon you are sleeping, I give to you and your seed shall be as the stars of heaven. Jubilees 27:23. In Jubilees, the laws that Jacob receives are part of the cosmic order that governs both heaven and earth. This emphasis on Jacob as the inheritor of divine law elevates his role beyond just receiving a birthright. He becomes the custodian of God's eternal commandments. His story links him to the heavenly tablets mentioned earlier, which contain the divine blueprint for creation. Jubilees doesn't just stop at the rivalry between Jacob and Esau. It expands this conflict into a prophetic vision of the ongoing struggle between their descendants. The book suggests that the rivalry between Jacob and Esau represents the larger spiritual battle between God's chosen people and the forces of evil. Esau's descendants symbolize the nations that will become adversaries to God's chosen people, and this ongoing conflict is evident throughout biblical history. This spiritual opposition between Israel and the descendants of Esau plays a crucial role in the apocalyptic vision of the Book of Jubilees, linking the tension between the two nations to the end times. While Jacob and his sons journeyed into Egypt to join Joseph, Esau's descendants remained in the land of Edom, and from that moment, the enmity between these nations persisted. Jubilees 4:53, Genesis 33 verse 16. This vision of a continuous spiritual struggle reflects the broader themes in Jubilees, where the story of the patriarchs fits into a larger cosmic plan, one that involves not only Abraham's family but the destinies of entire nations and the ultimate battle between good and evil. In Genesis, we witness the birth of Jacob's 12 sons through his wives Leah and Rachel, and their maidservants. These 12 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin, become the heads of the tribes of Israel. However, Jubilees adds a layer of divine order to their births, emphasizing that they were not merely the result of human relationships but part of a predetermined plan set by God. According to Jubilees, the timing and sequence of their births were ordained to align with the sacred calendar. Each son's birth followed a divine schedule, making their arrivals integral to the larger cosmic plan. Jacob's wives and maidservants gave birth to his 12 sons, each according to the time set by the Lord, and their destinies were written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 28:12, Genesis 29:31-30:34. While Genesis focuses on the narrative surrounding these births, Jubilees stresses that their births were preordained in the heavenly tablets, reinforcing the idea that the 12 tribes were part of God's predestined plan for the world. One significant event in Genesis is the story of Reuben, Jacob's firstborn son, who loses his status after committing a grave sin, Genesis 35 verse 22. Jubilees expands on this, highlighting the spiritual consequences of Reuben's actions and explaining why Judah and Levi rise to prominence in his place. In Jubilees, Reuben's sin is framed as a violation of the divine laws established long before his actions. It's not merely seen as a personal failure but as a spiritual transgression that disqualifies him from leading the tribes. As a result, Judah, the fourth son, emerges as the tribal leader, and Levi takes on the priesthood, roles that were part of the divine order set by God. Because of his sin, Reuben was excluded from the inheritance, and Judah was chosen as the prince over his brothers, while Levi was set apart for the priesthood forever. Jubilees 33:10, Genesis 49 verse 34. Jubilees places greater emphasis on how this event aligns with the cosmic plan, illustrating that Judah's rise and Levi's priesthood were both part of God's eternal law. The tribe of Levi is set apart for the priesthood, with Moses and Aaron descending from this tribe, Exodus 28. But in Jubilees, Levi's priesthood is depicted as part of an eternal mandate. The book stresses that Levi's role as the spiritual leader of the tribes wasn't just a matter of tribal duty, but was established in the heavenly tablets long before the Levitical priesthood was formalized under Moses. According to Jubilees, Levi was chosen by God to lead the tribes spiritually, ensuring that the divine laws were observed. His priestly role is described as part of the cosmic order, connecting heaven and earth, and his descendants were set apart forever to offer sacrifices and mediate between the people and the Lord. Jubilees 32:17, Exodus 28. While Genesis and Exodus focus on the Levitical priesthood during Moses' time, Jubilees emphasizes that Levi's role was part of God's plan from the very beginning. In Genesis, Jacob's 12 sons go on to become the heads of the 12 tribes, eventually settling in the Promised Land. In Jubilees, the tribes are not merely portrayed as inheritors of land. They are tasked with upholding God's laws. Each tribe carries a specific spiritual responsibility, expected to follow the commandments written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees emphasizes that the 12 tribes were chosen not only to inherit the land but also to serve as stewards of God's commandments, ensuring that his laws are passed down through generations. These are the laws for your sons and their descendants forever, written on the heavenly tablets, that they may walk in them and live. Jubilees 29:6, Genesis 49. In Genesis, Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery out of jealousy over their father's favoritism. Genesis 37. However, Jubilees reinterprets this event, highlighting its cosmic consequences. According to Jubilees, the brothers' act of betrayal was not simply a family dispute but a serious transgression against the divine order, and their guilt extends far beyond personal jealousy. The book emphasizes that their sin was recorded on the heavenly tablets, and unless they repented, their descendants would suffer. This focus on the heavenly tablets connects their actions to the future suffering of Israel under Egyptian bondage, setting the stage for God's plan to redeem the nation of Israel through the Exodus. Jubilees 34:4-9. Joseph's rise to power in Egypt is presented in Genesis as the result of his wisdom and ability to interpret dreams. Genesis 41. Jubilees, however, expands on this, explaining that Joseph's rise was part of a divine plan written on the heavenly tablets. His success in Egypt was not merely due to his abilities but because God had preordained his role as a savior for the Israelites. Joseph's rise is shown as part of the heavenly design that would ultimately lead to the Exodus. It was written that Joseph would rule over Egypt, and through him, the sons of Israel would be saved from famine, but they would also be bound in Egypt for a time. Jubilees 42:2. This perspective emphasizes that Joseph's life was a cosmic event, with his rise to power serving a much larger purpose in God's plan for Israel's deliverance. A significant addition in Jubilees is the role of angels in Joseph's life. While Genesis portrays Joseph's close relationship with God through dreams, Jubilees goes further by introducing angels who guide and protect Joseph throughout his journey. Jubilees describes how angels were sent by God to watch over Joseph from the moment he was sold into slavery, ensuring he would fulfill his destiny in Egypt. These angels intervened at key moments in Joseph's life, protecting him from harm and ensuring his faithfulness to God. The Lord sent his angels to guard Joseph on his journey to Egypt that he might not perish, for his life was precious in the eyes of the Lord, and his path had been written in the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 34:21. This detail adds a layer of spiritual protection to Joseph's story, demonstrating that his journey was carefully orchestrated by God, with angels ensuring his eventual rise to power and his role in saving his family. One of the most significant differences between Genesis and Jubilees is the connection of Joseph's life to the Exodus. In Genesis, Joseph's role concludes with his family settling in Egypt, but in the Book of Jubilees, his life takes on a prophetic significance, foreshadowing the enslavement and eventual deliverance of the Israelites. According to Jubilees, Joseph's rise to power in Egypt was not solely about saving his family from famine. It was also a fulfillment of prophecy, which would eventually lead to the Exodus. The text reveals that Joseph was aware of the future bondage of his descendants and played a role in preparing them for their eventual freedom. As Joseph said to his brothers, "I will die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Fear not, for these things have been written and sealed on the heavenly tablets." Jubilees 46:9. This prophetic aspect is more pronounced in Jubilees than in Genesis, where Joseph's death marks the end of his story. In Jubilees, however, his death is seen as a transition, marking the beginning of Israel's enslavement, but also a prophetic promise that they would be delivered from Egypt. This ties Joseph's life directly into the cosmic plan of redemption, which would be fulfilled through the Exodus. In Genesis, Israel's enslavement begins when a new Pharaoh arises, who does not know Joseph and begins oppressing the Israelites. Exodus 1 verses 8-14. But in Jubilees, this period of enslavement is viewed as part of a cosmic prophecy that was already written in the heavenly tablets. God had foretold Israel's bondage long before it occurred, and it was part of his divine plan to lead them toward the Exodus and the giving of the Mosaic Law. This prophetic framework connects directly to Joseph's role in bringing Israel to Egypt in the first place. While Joseph saved Israel from famine, their time in Egypt was destined to end in slavery, which would ultimately showcase God's power in delivering his people. The heavenly tablets had already recorded that Israel would be oppressed in Egypt, and that God would bring them out with great power and wonders, so his name would be glorified. Jubilees 48:1. In this view, Israel's time in Egypt is not merely a historical occurrence but part of a larger spiritual narrative, where their enslavement and eventual exodus were predestined for God's glory. The suffering of the Israelites is framed as a necessary trial that would prepare them to receive the laws given at Mount Sinai. In Exodus, God acts directly to bring about the plagues and deliver Israel from Pharaoh's oppression, Exodus 7-12, but Jubilees introduces an additional layer of spiritual warfare. It depicts angels as key figures in the battle between God and Pharaoh. The oppression of Israel is presented as part of a spiritual conflict between the forces of good and evil. The figure of Master, often associated with Satan, is depicted as actively working to harden Pharaoh's heart and intensify Israel's suffering. Master and his evil spirits are said to have encouraged the Egyptians to oppress Israel even more, testing their faithfulness to God. with the Prince of Master trying to destroy them with harsh bondage and cause them to abandon their faith in the Lord. Jubilees 48:9. Thus, Jubilees adds a cosmic dimension to the story of Israel's enslavement, showing that it wasn't only about political power. Spiritual forces were at work trying to thwart God's plan for Israel's deliverance. The plagues in Egypt are not just acts of divine judgment but part of a greater cosmic battle, with Master trying to prevent Israel's exodus. In Jubilees, the heavenly tablets play a central role in explaining how the laws and the timing of the exodus were part of God's eternal plan. The exodus is not merely a reaction to Israel's suffering, but has been carefully timed and preordained according to the divine calendar inscribed on the heavenly tablets. The book emphasizes that the timing of the exodus was tied to the observance of sacred laws, and Israel's deliverance was meant to align them with the divine order. Jubilees reveals that Israel's time in Egypt, their suffering, and their moment of deliverance were all predetermined, and God's actions were in perfect harmony with the cosmic timeline. It was written on the heavenly tablets that on the 14th day of the first month, at the appointed time, God would bring Israel out of Egypt, for this was the day set apart from the beginning of creation. Jubilees 49:1. This specific detail is unique to Jubilees. While Exodus focuses on the events leading up to and during the plagues, Jubilees introduces the concept that the timing of the Exodus was part of a prearranged cosmic calendar, tied to the laws of the universe. This makes the Exodus more than just a historical event. It is part of the spiritual fabric of creation. The 10 plagues in Exodus, Exodus 7-12, are portrayed as dramatic acts of divine power meant to force Pharaoh to release the Israelites. In Jubilees, however, these plagues take on a cosmic significance. They are not only divine punishments but also symbolic acts that defeat Egypt's gods and the spiritual forces behind them. Each plague is seen as a strike not just against Pharaoh but against the spiritual rulers of Egypt, undermining the forces of darkness that sought to keep Israel enslaved. The Lord sent the plagues upon Egypt not only to judge Pharaoh but to show that the gods of Egypt were nothing before him, for they were false powers unable to stand before the Almighty. Jubilees 48:11. In this view, the plagues are part of a larger cosmic conflict between good and evil, where the God of Israel defeats both the physical and spiritual powers of Egypt. Jubilees also suggests that Master and his evil forces were working behind the scenes to prevent Pharaoh from releasing Israel, but God's power overwhelmed them at every turn. In Exodus, Moses receives the law directly from God on Mount Sinai, but Jubilees adds the detail that these laws were not created in that moment. They had already been inscribed on the heavenly tablets long before Moses' time. The heavenly tablets, according to Jubilees, are a cosmic record of all of God's laws, established at the very beginning of creation. They serve as a guide for both angels and humans. Moses is simply the human recipient of laws that were preordained for all time. The Mosaic Law is therefore not just a set of rules for the Israelites. It is part of a divine order that governs the entire universe. The law and the testimony were ordained and written on the heavenly tablets, created even before the foundation of the world, so that they might guide all the generations of the children of Israel. Jubilees 6:17. While Exodus focuses on the dramatic revelation of the law at Sinai, Jubilees presents it as part of a cosmic plan. The laws were always meant to be revealed, and their timing was in accordance with the divine calendar. One of the most fascinating aspects of Jubilees is its claim that the Mosaic Law was observed long before Moses. The traditional Bible portrays Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as righteous individuals but does not specify that they were given the full law. Jubilees, however, claims that the patriarchs were already observing the Sabbath, performing sacrifices, and following many of the laws that would later be given to Moses. This makes the Mosaic Law not a new development, but a restoration of laws that had been passed down from the beginning of time. For instance, Abraham is depicted as observing the Sabbath, circumcising his sons, and following the commandments that were written on the heavenly tablets, Jubilees 16:28. In this way, Jubilees presents the law as a timeless code given to all the righteous from Adam onward, with Moses being the one chosen to deliver it in its complete form to the nation of Israel. The book also emphasizes the cosmic calendar, with the observance of time, particularly the Sabbath, festivals, and Jubilee years, being central to the divine order. These laws of timekeeping are part of the heavenly tablets, and following them is seen as aligning with the divine rhythm of the universe. The solar calendar is emphasized over the lunar calendar, with a year consisting of 364 days, which is presented as the correct way to observe God's commandments. Jubilees warns that deviating from this divine calendar can lead to spiritual disorder, and this is why the laws of timekeeping are so central to the Mosaic law. Write down for Israel the law of the Sabbath and the festivals, for these times are ordained on the heavenly tablets, and you must observe them exactly, lest you fall into error. Jubilees 5:2. This focus on the cosmic calendar is not as prominent in the traditional Bible, where the Sabbath and festivals are mentioned but without the same emphasis on their cosmic origins. Jubilee stresses that following this calendar is key to remaining in God's favor, as it aligns human life with the divine plan. While the Mosaic law in the Bible is given specifically to the Israelites, Jubilees presents these laws as eternal, binding not only for Israel but for all generations and even the angels. The laws written on the heavenly tablets are not temporary guidelines for one nation. They are eternal commandments that govern both heaven and earth. In Jubilees, the laws given to Moses are meant to be observed by all of God's creation, including the angels, who are depicted as keeping the Sabbath and observing God's festivals in heaven. The law that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai is eternal and will be observed in heaven and on earth. The angels keep the Sabbath, and the righteous will observe the commandments forever. Jubilees 50:13. This concept of the eternal law is not as explicit in the Bible, where the Mosaic law is largely seen as specific to the covenant between God and Israel. In the Book of Jubilees, the future of Israel is not left to chance. It is part of a divinely orchestrated timeline that has been written on the heavenly tablets since the dawn of time. This timeline outlines the rise and fall of nations, the exile and return of Israel, and the ultimate judgment that will come upon the world. Everything that unfolds in human history, from creation to the final judgment, follows a cosmic schedule recorded in heaven. A key feature of Jubilees is its insistence that these events are preordained and that nothing happens outside of God's divine plan. The book provides a prophetic overview of Israel's journey, explaining that their exile, suffering, and restoration were all written in the heavenly records and must unfold according to the divine calendar. From their rebellion to their redemption, every moment in Israel's story, including the appointed times for their deliverance, was fixed long ago. While Genesis and Exodus focus on specific events in Israel's history, Jubilees offers a broader perspective, showing that Israel's destiny is part of a larger cosmic plan that has already been determined. The book places great emphasis on the role of angels throughout Israel's history, and their involvement becomes even more critical in the end times. In Jubilees, the angels of the Lord are responsible for executing God's judgment on the nations, ensuring His will is carried out both in heaven and on earth. As the end of days draws near, the angels will descend to separate the righteous from the wicked, gathering those who have remained faithful to God's commandments. Jubilees also introduces the concept that Mtima, the leader of the evil spirits, will be bound and cast into the abyss, symbolizing the ultimate defeat of darkness. The Lord will send His angels to gather His chosen, and they will bind the prince of evil spirits, casting him into the abyss until the time of judgment, when he will be destroyed forever. This portrayal of angels as agents of divine justice adds a unique layer to the end times prophecy. While traditional scriptures speak of angels in the context of judgment, as seen in Revelation, Jubilees provides a more detailed vision of their role in the spiritual warfare that will unfold in the last days. One of the central themes of Jubilees is its prophetic vision of Israel's redemption. Despite Israel's rebellion and exile, God has already determined a time when they will be restored to their land and renewed in their covenant with Him. This restoration is not just a political event. It is a spiritual renewal that aligns with the cosmic plan written on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, Israel's redemption will come after a period of great tribulation, during which the nation will be purified, the law will be re-established, and the people will once again walk in holiness, preparing for the coming of the Messiah and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. Jubilees prophesies that the children of Israel will turn back to the Lord with all their heart, and He will gather them from the nations and establish them in their land, just as it was written on the heavenly tablets. While traditional scriptures, such as Isaiah and Jeremiah, also speak of Israel's restoration, Jubilees adds the detail that this restoration is part of a preordained timeline with specific events already recorded in the heavenly records. In the end times, Jubilees describes the coming of a messianic kingdom where God's chosen ruler, often interpreted as the Messiah, will establish righteousness on earth. This kingdom will mark the end of the current age and the beginning of God's eternal rule, where the law will be upheld, and the righteous will inherit the earth. The final judgment in Jubilees involves the separation of the righteous from the wicked, with the wicked being cast into the lake of fire, where they will be destroyed forever. Mtima and his evil spirits will be defeated, and the Messiah will rule in peace and justice. This vision of the end times aligns with the apocalyptic imagery found in the Book of Revelation, but adds a stronger emphasis on the role of the law and the cosmic order being restored. The Messianic kingdom in Jubilees reflects a vision of a restored creation, where the law is fully observed, and the righteous are rewarded for their faithfulness. The final judgment will bring the ultimate defeat of evil, ushering in an era of eternal peace. If you found value in this deep dive into the Book of Jubilees and its unique cosmic vision of biblical history, be sure to share this video with others who might be interested in exploring these profound mysteries. By sharing, you help us continue uncovering ancient texts and revealing the hidden layers of God's eternal plan. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Bible Stories Alive, and join the conversation in the comments. Together, we can delve even deeper into these fascinating biblical insights.